I want to talk about the book review assignment. So you've been working through a book that um, the English department has chosen. I believe maybe the college itself is using this book. That sometimes that happens. This is basically a common read book, and sometimes an English department reads it or a psychology department together. Sometimes it's a bit wider, and the school is using it anyway. It's the book that we've picked, and your job is to read the book, understand it, and be able to evaluate it. Okay, that's what you do as you actually work through the book. Now, when it comes to writing a book review on it, okay, that's a different matter. And well, it's we need to talk about that so you know exactly what I'm looking for and how to do this. Okay, so the first thing that you need to kind of pretend when you write a book review, and by the way, this is called a review. It's called a critique. Sometimes it's called a response, but when someone asks you to write a critique on something or a review on something, this is what we're talking about. Now, the word critique is CRITIQUE, critique. It's got this notion of evaluation. And sometimes the evaluation is positive, sometimes it's negative, many times it's a mix of both. Strengths and weaknesses. All right, so it's not sometimes in everyday speech or in current modern parlance, the word critic, the word criticism seems to have a negative side to it, right? Like someone was just tearing apart your work and just hated it and thought it was awful. And you might say, well, there's so much criticism there, right? Well, that's not really the way I'm using the word here. The word is stronger, bigger than that. The word just means thoughtful evaluation. And it can be very positive. So there's positive criticism, right? So literary criticism and a literary critic is someone who does this with literature. They read it, they think about it, they try to properly place it in terms of strengths and weaknesses, importance, that sort of thing, right? Some movie critics, film criticism, that sort of thing. It's something that we do all the time, and you should know it and get better at it. And part of getting you to think about this and to do it is to let's do some criticism, if you will, with this book that we're working through. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to pretend that when you come to write the book review, you're writing to someone who has not read the book. Okay, of course I have, but you need to put me out of your mind, and you need to pretend that you're writing to someone who hasn't read the book. And there's something else I would like you to pretend. Hopefully you can inspire them if you really think the book is important, and they'll go on to look at it. Maybe they'll learn it. But let's also kind of suppose that they're never going to read it. Okay, they haven't read it. They're kind of never going to read it. And they're depending on you to give them a pretty good idea of what the book said. Right? And then they would like to know, the second part is, well, what did you think? Now, you being you, the writer of the critique or the review, what do you think about that? What did you think about the book? But, there are two parts here. There are two parts to this essay, okay? The top part and the bottom part. Now, the first part, the top part of here, is the summary part. Your job is just to summarize this book, okay? At that top part, that section, that first section, by the way, I'm not going to tell you how many paragraphs because you have to determine that. It might be, for a book this size, I think 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs would be about right. But 3 or 4, that's first section. Right? Section is a very broad division of the essay. Now, within those 2 broad divisions, you can have smaller divisions. We would call those paragraphs or subsections and then paragraphs, but whatever. The first thing you have to do is summarize the book for your reader, the reader of your review. Pretend that they haven't read it and kind of pretend they're not going to read it. It's up to you to give them the main points of the book. And then the big idea. Notice that I've separated those 2 things out, okay? The main points. There are going to be plenty of good, solid points this person is making. But there's one unifying idea also behind it. under under which the umbrella is sort of that umbrella idea, and under that umbrella idea, these main points make sense. They all work together to support that big one, and so you have to be able to recognize the main points, and then as you look at the main points, one of them is going to all of a sudden you realize, well, that's the big one, that's the point of the whole book. So that we call that the thesis, and then the other ones we would just call the main supports, the supporting points or the main points. Now, sometimes you look at those main points that you've pulled out, and you can't find a single one that actually seems to be, the controlling principle. And if you can't do that, then what you have to do is you have to look at those main points, and then you have to look up and say, okay, if I had to put it in my own words what the controlling principle is, how would I say, what's that big idea that all these main points really support? And then you say it, write it down. That's the main point. That's the thesis. That's the thesis. Okay. I got to be a little careful with my language because I am suggesting you have two levels of this, right? You have these main ideas that are going to be at play in the book, and then you have this controlling idea. And sometimes it's going to appear as one of those main ideas, but if you look at it carefully, you can see that it really is much bigger. It belongs in a category of its own. It's the top dog, if you will. And sometimes it's not actually written down. It's not specifically one of those main points because they all seem to be kind of equal weight. You know what I'm saying? And at that point, you have to just kind of think of it and say, well, what's that big idea that really all of these points support? And then you write it down. Okay, just so you know the terminology used for this, when it's actually spelled out for you, that's called explicit, right? The thesis could be, or that controlling idea, the point that the whole book is about, right? I'm calling it the thesis. It could be explicit. Explicit means that it literally is spelled out for you, okay? Or it could be implicit. Implicit means it's not spelled out for you word for word, like the author didn't say, hey, here's the controlling principle, but that's what it is because that's how the book is working. All right. So your job is to find those main points and to find the main idea of the book and then to put them together in a couple paragraphs for someone who's not going to read the book. And you need to be faithful to what the book is trying to do, right? This is not a place for you to evaluate the book yet. You don't have any opinions coming in here yet, right? Your job is to summarize it. So just pretend that the author of the book is sitting behind you, or sitting off to the side, and for some reason they can't do it, but they're trusting you to do it. And so you're telling your friends about this book or whatever, and then you look over to the author and you're like, did I represent you correctly? That author better said, yeah, you did a pretty good job. It took me 300 pages, it took you 5 minutes, but you got the main points, That's the idea. You got to be faithful to the author, right? That's the first section up there. Now, I would love for that first section to start off in title of the book, author, name of the author, has a few things to say about whatever the topic of the book is, okay? And then you start that way, okay? But right at the beginning of this section, I would like as you write it out, as a sentence or two that starts it all, I want you to talk about the name of the book, where it was published, when it was published, and the name of the author, and make it flow in sentences that belong to paragraphs. That's how you start it off. And then you're just listing those points. So let me ask you this. Let me tell you this, some advice here as to how do you find these main points? Well, as you read the book, every time you hit a general statement that seems to be the thing that the next couple of pages are about, or maybe it's the key idea of that chapter or something, but it's going to be a general statement, okay? And then you're going to start realizing that the other paragraphs or some of that other information is being used to support that general statement or to illustrate it, to give examples of it, okay? Then you found one of those general statements. In a book of 250 pages, there might be 12, 13, 14, 15 of these general statements, okay? 10, 12, I don't know. But just if it feels that way to you, you got to learn how to start recognizing these. Just write it down somewhere. Write it in your phone, speak it into a voice recording, put a dog ear on the book, I don't know, and then mark it with your fingernails so you can find the impression on the page, underline it. I don't know, but you got to be able to start collecting these, okay? And once you have a list, you can just collect them as a list as you work through the chapters and you have these things collected. When it comes to writing the critique, just take that list and use those things as sentences and paragraphs. Let's do that. Put them in paragraphs, and then as you type it out, you might start realizing, well, I need to work with transitions. I need to make this thing flow, and you start just using the language that you're very good at to make the thing read better. You're adding stuff, and you're making these main pieces lead into each other. You're arranging them that way. That's basically how you would write that summary. Okay. Now, once you finish, it's okay for you to go back and bring some details in, right, to make it feel a little more concrete or interesting, right? But a big rule of thumb here, a big piece of advice I have for you is, as you're writing the summary, leave out all the details first. Leave them all out. Any specific numbers, specific names, specific places, leave them out, because your job is to condense. If you start keeping in those details and you keep one over the other, I'm like, well, why didn't you just keep both? What's your rationale? And then you start letting those details come in. Pretty soon you're writing a 10-page summary. No, we're not asking that. Your job is to write 4 or 5 paragraphs of summary. Okay? So you got to cut. You got to do some major cutting. And I would say one of the obvious things to leave out at the beginning here is just all those details. Just work with those main points like I'm telling you. Then once you have that structured and you're like, well, I think I would like it to be a little longer, or it doesn't flow very well, then you can bring some of the details, 1 or 2 or 3, bring it back in to spice it up a little bit to make it a good reading experience, right? And that's your summary, okay? Now, honestly, you might be saying, well, can I see some examples? And then if I take that request seriously, I might be trying to provide examples. Well, I'm just going to say this, okay? You know what this is because you live with this all your life. Pick some of your favorite movies and ask Google to summarize them for you. Look up a summary pick 5 of your favorite movies. Have you read a couple books or more than a couple? Pick 2 or 3 of them. Ask Google to show you a book review on that book. Not this one, but a book that you've already read. And then just see how it works. Okay, those are your examples. I mean, I can put all that work in and bring a couple examples. It's already all out there. So just ask AI for some summaries, take a look, see what it looks like, see what it feels like, and then come do it for this book. Okay. Now, once you get that section, that first section which is the summary section. Sometimes we can refer to it as they said. Like, this is all about the author. They said, they think, they believe. Okay. Once you get that done, you can move into the evaluation. Now, the evaluation is the I say spot. The I believe, I think, I'm. Now let's get this clear right off the bat. I am perfectly okay with using the I, the me, the my, the first person pronoun. Okay, you're talking about your ideas, your analysis, your evaluation. Use the I think, I believe. Okay. If you run into a college professor that's telling you that you cannot use the I, the me, the my in academic writing, that person is mistaken. I will say that to their face if I need to. It's not really that big of a deal. But the point is, what is the reason for the rule? Okay. And if it's a real rule, it's got a really great reason as being practiced by professionals. But if you go into the professional world of academics, of journalism, of nonfiction writing, the I, the me, the my, it's being used all over the place. Academic journals, it's there. So why would I take it away from you? That's just dumb. You go ahead and use this wonderful word, I, me, my, in your writing down here, okay? And develop your thoughts. Now, I've often thought about why this big rule is out there. It's so dumb, really. But the only thing I can come up with is that sometimes teachers do not want you to use opinion based on your preference or your subjective experience. And maybe they're thinking, if they take away the I, it's not so easy for you to talk about your feelings, your experience, right? Because remember, although that is so important to us as human beings, when it comes to academic writing, that's not going to be viewed as proof or evidence of anything, because you're just one person. How do you know you're representative of a larger group? So for memoir, obviously very important, but not for research writing. Okay, so maybe that's it. I don't know. Also, writing rules tend to follow a long history of tradition and influence. And when a lot of this writing took part in Latin, and then as it moved into English and centuries ago, the ego was considered not something to bring in for stylistic reasons. I don't know. Use the I, okay? But let's make sure that in your evaluation, you are using opinions and thoughts and ideas that are based on publicly accepted values and logic, and not your own personal experience of reading the book. In other words, when you write the critique, I don't care. Please, what I'm trying to say is, it's not about how this book made you feel. It's not about whether or not you enjoyed it or whether or not you thought it was good. Now, if you thought it was good, I'm going to ask you, well, why did you think it was good? And then if you tell me, well, because I just really enjoyed reading it, I'd be like, well, there are very important books that maybe you don't necessarily enjoy reading, but that doesn't make them not good, right? It's not about whether or not you enjoyed it or whether or not it could keep your attention. It's whether or not it was right or wrong, or was it as did it represent the idea there correctly, because maybe the book forgot to look at other angles, right, or other reasons, or maybe it was just using selective evidence, right, and not looking at the big picture. Well, that's a fault, right? Or maybe it was making something that's really not that complicated, and they were overcomplicating it because they had a book deal and they needed to get to 250 pages. I kid you not, that happens sometimes, and it happens a lot in textbooks as well. Textbooks want to present you with value. They want to say, if we're going to charge you 200 books for this book, we want you to feel like it's a big, hefty thing. And only about 20% of what's in that book you might actually ever use in the class, right? So there might be an overwriting because it's demanded by the marketing process. And really, the idea is not that complicated. It's not that original. And there are plenty of books that try to overcomplicate. And let me ask you this. Given a group of 100 people, remember the 100 people in the room, given a group of 100 people, how many of them would believe that overcomplicating something is usually not a good strategy? Right? Now, that's what I mean when you need to, many of them would believe that that's wrong, or that you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't overcomplicate relationships. You shouldn't overcomplicate your intelligence. You shouldn't overcomplicate your appearance. You shouldn't overcomplicate all sorts of stuff. Your parenting, okay. So that's something that you can talk about as maybe a fault if the book is actually doing that, because that's not just your own personal experience. This is a value that we hold as a community. You see what I'm saying? So you're never going to be able to prove your evaluation on there. This is not math, and you're never really going to make everyone believe what you say. Like the fact that you might have reasons for thinking this book was strong or weak or half-baked or very important or whatever, right? You might have people that read your book review and just don't buy it, right? So you're not necessarily trying to convince them that it's not persuasive in that way. You just have to really honestly try to see the strengths and weaknesses of the book based on our commonly held beliefs and definitions, not on your own personal experience of how the book felt to you. You see what I'm saying? So there could be, what if this person isn't using enough data? Okay, there's a huge book up there. Oh boy, I can't believe I'm doing this, but let's see. Do you see it up there? It's right here. Oh, I'm not going to be able to zoom in and get it to focus on that. But the book is called Stiff by Susan Faludi. It's actually a major voice in masculine writings on masculinity. She has more than a few chapters, 3 or 4 chapters, where she's just not using enough information. She's interviewing 4 or 5 families from one geographic region. And from those 4 or 5 families, she's making generalized statements that she thinks applies to the masculine element of the United States. No, you can't draw those conclusions, right? You might be onto something, but you need to use the language that says we need more study or something. You can't be as definitive as you are when really you've only looked at 6 or 7 families I upped it a little bit because I'm trying to give her some grace. That was a great book, actually. Much more strength in it than weaknesses. But nevertheless, it's just it wasn't that's not the way you do evidence, and that's not how you draw conclusions from evidence. And the language of certainty shouldn't be there. Let's use the language of hypothesis, because you looked at only 7 families from only 2 states. You see what I'm saying? Now sometimes that's conceptual, and you can refer to that. Now sometimes the book might actually have troubles with how it was arranged or formatted, or okay, so I can't believe I'm playing this game with you here. Okay, brother, you see this book up here right under the red? There's a black book up there. It's called The Great Influenza by John Barry. A very important voice on influenza studies. It was the Spanish plague, our first major global epidemic of the 20th century. COVID being the only comparable thing to it, I think. I think it was worse than COVID, though. Anyway, the book is huge. The book is huge. The guy got tired in the middle. I'm convinced. Because the paragraphing falls apart. Great paragraphings, the 2/5, then the 3rd fifth in there, it's just horrible. And then the 4th fifth and the 5th fifth, great paragraphing again. Okay, so something happened there. He got tired. The editor, maybe it was a deadline that he rushed. I don't know, but I think I can prove that. All right, so I might mention that as a minor weakness. Right, I think the book is extremely good and valuable. So this would just be a minor thing, but in my critique, I have the right to mention that. So that's the sort of stuff that you need to be doing. Okay. Now, if you haven't read the whole book that you're working with, read as much as you can. Do some skimming. Read the front end and the back, the intro, the conclusion, the first chapter, the last chapter. Usually the main ideas are represented there, okay? And do the best you can, but remember that your job is to be as honest and as fair to the author when you're representing their ideas. And then when you come in to talk about your thoughts and opinion here, be sure that you try to situate that on publicly held values and beliefs. And if you think the book strays from those things, then you can mention that as things that could be strengthened or whatnot. If you think the book does an excellent job, you can talk about that. You can also talk about how the book can be relevant for today, how it could be expanded, how it could be maybe presented. Maybe the book you think is so important that this message needs to be to younger audiences, and how would you do that? Maybe that's something that you could suggest. There are a lot of things you can do in the evaluation part. One last really quick rule of thumb here. The title of this assignment is called the book review, the book critique. It's not called a summary. It does involve a summary, but the actual essay type and the assignment type is called a critique, which means that the critique, your evaluation, your analysis of the book, should be the larger part of the essay, because that gives homage to the name of the assignment, the type of assignment it is. So if you're thinking in terms of size, the summary needs to be shorter than the evaluation, okay? Because the evaluation needs to be the major part of the essay. So if your summary is 4 paragraphs, why don't you make your evaluation 8 or 9? Okay, now the paragraphs don't have to be huge, but we're talking about really expand here. Hey, I hope that this is enough for you to feel confident about this and to do a pretty good job with the essay assignment. And as always, thanks for watching.